The hotly contested elections in West Bengal is over, and the much awaited counting of votes is all set to begin from the 4th of May. But this election in West Bengal is all set to go down in the history of Indian elections as an unprecedented election, primarily because of the massive central security deployment. The TMC government under Mamata Banerjee has alleged that the center is colluding with the Election Commission to allegedly influence the voters and to intimidate the state government. The center and the Election Commission deny these allegations and they justify the massive security deployment given the notorious track record of Bengal's political violence. So, where does the truth lie? Let's examine. When you look at democratic elections, one of the fundamental tenets is the conduct of free and fair elections. And this is exactly what the Election Commission of India is vested with. So, under the constitutional mandate, the Election Commission can requisition central armed police forces to be deployed in election duty to ensure that a free and fair electoral environment can be maintained, to maintain peace and security so that all the political candidates can contest with a level playing field without the fear of threats and intimidation. Indian politics historically has been notorious for its usage of muscle power to intimidate political opponents. And the same applies for voters. For voters to step out of their homes and cast their democratic right, they should be able to work in an environment that is free from any threats and intimidation. And that requires the creation of a safe and secure environment, which is the mandate of the Election Commission. So, just like the Election Commission gets some extraordinary powers, where it briefly takes over the state administration and state police to ensure their impartiality, similarly, it can requisition central armed police forces from the Ministry of Home Affairs to protect the sanctity of the electoral process. So, central forces like CRPF, CISF, BSF, ITBP, SSB, they are regularly deployed across states, across the country during election period. So, there is nothing new about this. But when you look at the scale of troop deployment in West Bengal, that is where the political controversy comes from. But if you look at Bengal's notorious reputation with political violence, it seems justified that you do require massive security forces to ensure that free and fair elections can be carried out. Because if you look at the last assembly election in 2021, 1,979 complaints of violence were reported at the National Human Rights Commission. At the directions of Calcutta High Court, 52 murder cases and unnatural deaths were investigated by the CBI. And according to reports, they were all connected with political violence. In the state, there is a history of political rivalry which has turned violent between the left parties and the TMC, between the TMC and the BJP and the right wing parties. So, given this blood soaked political history of Bengal, it only seems valid that appropriate security measures need to be taken by the Election Commission of India. But, however, what triggers the controversy is that recently statements were made by Union Home Minister Amit Shah and the DG of CRPF that up to 70,000 CAPFs will continue to remain in West Bengal to perform post poll duties, which is to ensure law and order even after the election process has ended. So, this raises serious constitutional and legal questions. And that is exactly what we will examine in the next few minutes. Now, let's have a discussion without any political bias and let's look at both sides of the argument. When you look at the security deployment, 2.4 lakh security personnel were deployed from the CAPFs. And the Election Commission ensured that no stone remains unturned. The CAPFs have set up AI enabled control rooms. They have deployed drones for surveillance. They have been using armored vehicles on the ground. In fact, the Election Commission has even requisitioned law enforcement agencies like NIA, CBI, and counter-terror units of the NSG, which is quite unprecedented. Because historically, Election Commission relies just on the central armed police forces like ITBP, CISF, and CRPF. But the center deploying NIA and NSG units on the ground is what raises more uncomfortable questions. And as I mentioned, Union Home Minister Amit Shah has said that up to 70,000 CAPFs are going to remain in West Bengal for up to 60 days, even after the polling cycle ends. The CRPF DG recently posted on social media that up to 500 companies of BSF, CRPF, and ITBP would be continued to be deployed even after the election cycle will come to an end. So, this is where we need to understand the logic and justification of the center and the election commission, and also appreciate the concerns being raised by legal experts, by former officers, and as well as by the state government in West Bengal. Critics point out that these developments indicate a militarization of Indian elections, deploying armored vehicles, using drones for surveillance, or using massive number of troops on the ground to act as an intimidating force to target opposition ruled states is being flagged by many former bureaucrats and former officers of the CAPFs. But however, as I said, there is a precedence to this. In sensitive states like Jammu and Kashmir or even in Chhattisgarh, in past elections, similar control rooms have been set up by CAPFs. Armored vehicles have been used as there is a risk of land mines being present in these conflict prone areas. Drones have been used for surveillance to ensure the safety and security of the officials and the electoral machinery. So there's nothing new about this. And even after the polling cycle ends, a few battalions often remain because after elections, that is, after the voting is over, you still have to secure the EVMs, the strong rooms where they are stored, and on counting day, when results are anticipated, there could be political violence between rival political parties. And after results are announced as well, there could be targeted violence where miscreants and political elements could target some of the voters if they believe that they did not vote for their candidates. So, to ensure this, a few battalions always remain behind even after voting ends, up to the counting and results and post results as well. But what is different in West Bengal this time is that the scale at which the troops are being retained, 500 companies accounting for 70,000 jawans of the CAPFs. So let's look at the constitutional scheme of things and the legal framework over here. Now, first, you need to understand the clear cut difference between election security and law and order. When it comes to maintaining the sanctity of the election process to ensure free and fair elections, the Election Commission of India has a constitutional duty to rely upon CAPFs and security forces to safeguard the electoral process. But when it comes to law and order, it's an established matter that states have an inviolable autonomy. Under the 7th schedule of the Indian Constitution, public order, that is law and order, is a state list subject. States have a clear jurisdiction which the center cannot violate. So CAPFs that are deployed for election duty, they will automatically do not get any jurisdictional powers in that state, meaning they can't take up any law and order function, be it placing any arrests or carrying out any policing function on the ground without the requisition of the state government and the state bureaucracy is not legally and constitutionally tenable. When you look at the law and order as a subject, it is the state civil administration and the police structure which exercises that authority. And the CAPF, by virtue of deployment for elections, cannot try to subsume that authority for itself. So let's understand what powers the Constitution vests with the Election Commission of India and under what grounds the central government can deploy central forces in a state. When you look at Article 324 of the Indian Constitution, the Election Commission of India is vested with the authority to supervise and have the superintendence and entire control over the electoral process. This includes ensuring the security of the electoral process, safeguarding the polling booths, safeguarding the EVMs, protecting the electoral officers. So, for these reasons, it has a constitutional right to requisition central forces from the Home Ministry. But this writ is election specific. It is primarily from the day the notification is brought out, the model code of conduct kicks in, and the whole campaign political cycle begins. The election commission can start bringing in the troops. But however, the mandate and jurisdiction here is very restricted and limited. See, once the election cycle itself ends, as I said, for post poll duties, a few battalions can be maintained for a temporary basis, just till counting day and for maybe few days after the results. But Constitutionally and legally, this authority of the CAPFs will start fading once election cycle gets over, because this will not automatically extend into a law and order duty. The jurisdiction given to CAPFs for election security will not automatically translate into a law and order duty. Now, there is one constitutional ground on which the center can retain forces in a state. Under Article 355, the center has a duty to protect every state from external aggression and internal disturbance. But please note, in West Bengal, you have neither of these cases. There is no external aggression or any internal disturbance as such. And more importantly, this is a duty of the union to protect the state from external threats and internal disturbances. It's not a power to deploy permanent central troops and treat it as an occupational force of sorts. Now, when you look at the authority of CAPFs in state deployment, the CRPF Act of 1949 makes it very, very clear that CRPF functions and exercises duties as directed. Now, who has the authority to provide these directions to CRPF or other similar CAPFs? Generally, this will come from Home Ministry, provided if there are two conditions that are satisfied. One, if there is President's rule, if President's rule has been proclaimed under Article 356, where the Union exercises that authority, then yes, the MHA can indeed secure a law and order role as well for CAPFs. Or if the state or region is declared as a disturbed area under the Disturbed Areas Act, and if the region is brought under the AFSPA, the Armed Forces Special Powers Act, which you see in parts of Northeast India, in Jammu and Kashmir, in those circumstances, definitely the MHA and the concerned CAPF can exercise that authority on their own without waiting for requisition or orders from the state administration. But in the case of West Bengal during election cycle, neither of these circumstances exist. There is no president's rule and it's a non-disturbed area. It's not a disturbed area under AFSPA. So in a non-disturbed area, if at all the CAPFs have to be called upon to perform such duty, this authority lies with the civil administration, that is with the district magistrate at the district level, or with the SSP and the Commissioner of Police in urban areas and the state DGP. So, public order, that is law and order, remains firmly as a state subject under the state administration, and CAPFs cannot automatically exercise this authority just because they have been called in for election duty. Their jurisdiction is largely restricted for an electoral role and doesn't go beyond that. Now, the law and the constitution makes it very clear that CAPFs are like a supplement, like an auxiliary force to the state police structure. Like, for example, how CRPF was designated as the primary anti-Naxal force of the center. The CRPF and Cobra units that were deployed in Naxal affected states, they would be requisitioned by the state police or the concerned district administration through the orders of the state government. Only then it could exercise its authority and jurisdiction. Or else there should be president's rule or the area should be under AFSPA. So when neither is the case, CRPF cannot extend its authority into a law and order domain. So what can CAPFs do and what they cannot do when they are sent for election duty? See, they can conduct flag marches. They can exercise area dominance by leading these marches through especially sensitive localities and voting constituencies where historically violence has been reported, so that it can create a deterrence. It can keep the miscreants and the criminal elements away. It can even set up these static pickets. It can lay down its position or put up tents at vulnerable locations where there is a history of violence to show its presence on the ground. It can even escort the electoral officials and the vehicles to perform the electoral duty, for which residual authority is vested with the Election Commission of India, like escorting electoral officials, escorting EVMs, guarding the strong rooms. These powers can be exercised by CAPFs on their own. But just because they are deployed in an electoral duty in a state, they cannot go and arrest someone. They can't impose cordons. They can't use force. Armed force cannot be used. This falls outside the limits of the jurisdiction of CAPFs. The assistant commandant who might be heading the unit cannot issue orders to arrest someone, cannot order opening of fire without approval from the state administration, cannot impose cordons. This falls outside the powers vested with the CAPFs. Now, even the legal framework aligns with what we have been discussing. If you look at Bharatiya Nagrik Suraksha Sanhita that replaced the CRPC, there is perfect alignment with the framework that we discussed. See, during elections, one big concern is unlawful assembly of people, which could turn violent. So, when there is an unlawful assembly to disperse the crowd, under Section 163 of BNSS, the authority to issue that order to clear that crowd lies only with the executive magistrate, the DM of the district, or with the officer in charge of the concerned police station. So, the assistant commandant of the CAPF unit cannot exercise his authority and issue direct orders to clear the unlawful assembly. Then, if at all, the mob or the crowd turns violent, violence breaks out, and armed force has to be used to contain the violence. Even this decision has to be taken by the civil administration, not by the CAPFs themselves. The use of armed force against such unlawful assemblies which are turning violent under Section 164, that power is vested only with the magistrate, under the written directions of the magistrate. So CAPFs cannot act independently to enforce law and order. Now, if they do it without the written directions of the magistrate, then they are operating outside the chain of command. Then they are essentially going outside the legal framework, which means those CAPF officers who are using force or arresting people or imposing cordons, they will not have any kind of legal immunity. So when they are held accountable, they are eligible for even prosecution as well. See, in a AFSPA area, things are different, like Jammu and Kashmir, where CRPF is actually deployed in an internal security role. CRPF can act independently to maintain law and order because that special powers have been vested with CRPF, plus AFSPA gives the legal immunity for their actions. The same goes with Northeast India, where parts of the region are under AFSPA, where central forces like Assam Rifles and other CAPFs can exercise that authority on their own. But if a CAPF Jawan were to open fire on a mob without written directions from the magistrate, there is no legal immunity provided to the actions of that public servant. You look at Section 218 of the Bharatiya Nagrik Suraksha Sanhita. It makes it very clear that protection from prosecution for acts performed during executing official duty, it's provided only to public servants if they are acting according to lawful orders. So if you have a CAPF Jawan acting outside the chain of command without receiving written orders from the civil administration, then that would be an illegal action, which can be prosecutable under law. So there is no legal immunity for any such action. But however, the Center and Election Commission do have a valid legal basis as well. This is where a center state fault line or a federal fault line opens up. See, based on the ECI's order of 19th March, once elections were announced, the Election Commission gains that control to conduct elections, to have that superintendence over elections that includes the security of the elections. So Election Commission can definitely requisition CAPFs, deploy them as it seems fit. Then under CRPF Act, definitely the center does exercise a degree of authority based on the threat perception which is present. But once deployed, though there is a legal basis for that, operationally, CAPFs cannot be utilized for law and order purposes because that authority vests only and only with the state government. See, the SR Bommai case of 1994 is very, very clear in this regard. The Supreme Court has made it very clear that the subject of law and order is almost inviolable. It is under state's autonomy, it's part of the federal autonomy. This is something the center can't step into. So, unless and until the state government and the civil administration requisitions the requirement of CAPFs to manage law and order, the CAPFs cannot act on their own. The other possibility is if there is presidential rule proclaimed under Article 356. Since that is not the case and there is no AFSPA in position, then unless and until the state government calls upon the CAPF to assist the state police, the CAPFs cannot get involved in law and order duties. So this is where the question comes up. That's what the TMC state government has been accusing the center of, that it's deploying massive number of forces, acting like an occupational force to intimidate the opposition ruled state and to try and influence the voters. But also please understand, Bengal has a history with deadly political violence. And all the parties that we have been mentioning have been equally involved and guilty of encouraging and abating this violence. So, from a security perspective, definitely yes, there is a requirement for enhanced security deployment. But should it be at the scale which we have seen in West Bengal? Because this was unprecedented. Should it be sort of a militarization of elections with deployment of drones and deployment of other central agencies like NSG and NIA as well? And should there be use of armored vehicles on the ground? So that is where the debate comes up. So the opinion here is very divided. Many former officers of CAPF, they say that this deployment is purely based on threat perceptions. We have seen similar scale deployments in J&K Chhattisgarh as well. But there are former bureaucrats who are very uncomfortable with what's happening. They are even accusing the election commission of giving up its impartiality and failing to rein in the center when it comes to targeting opposition ruled states. So what do you think? Is the center misusing its authority? Is it extending a overreach? Is this a case of constitutional overreach and occupation of a state by a central force? Or is it necessary to protect the sanctity of elections in a highly problematic, politically problematic state like West Bengal? What do you think? Please let me know in the comments. And thanks for watching.